Hello, we're back and we're here with Joe Haldeman, multiple Hugo Award winning author, poet, and artist. Joe, welcome back to the show. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I was taking a look at a videotape that you did for an interview at MIT, where you teach, in 2007. And about halfway through this lengthy interview, which was a lot of fun to listen to, was a discussion of an idea for an alien race that you thought might be the good basis for a book.
Yeah.
And at the time you were saying it, you just talked to the audience and says, now please don't anybody steal this because I might actually use this one. And you did in the Mars-bound trilogy,
Mars-bound, yeah.
which you've got Mars-bound, you've got Star-bound, and Earth-bound will be coming out later this year.
In December, yes.
Can you go back over the thought process that you went through to create this alien? Because it was fascinating.
Well, it's hard to. Yeah, it's not as if it's something that goes A, B, C, D. You know, you get a whole bunch of more or less unrelated thoughts, and in the process of describing them to somebody, you actually make a structure.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of the aliens. You know, here's a very strange truth. Okay, I put about 7 years of my life into that trilogy. When I mailed it off, it's not part of my life anymore.
So you don't.
I started a new book. You know, you asked me about things that happened in the book that I was writing last year. And I go, yeah, I guess I wrote that. Yeah. So I'm really deeply involved in the one I'm doing now, which is called Work Done for Hire.
So basically, when you're done with something, you're done with something.
Exactly, yeah. Otherwise, I suppose you could get confused if you tried to carry a lot of feeling for that book on.
I guess what entranced me about the interview was the fact that you basically kind of went over that, well, it was watching a writer, which I am not one of, so you're a magician as far as I'm concerned, is watching you say, well, if I, the equivalent of, well, if I turn my hand this way while I wave this hand,
yeah,
it'll work. And it was trying to come up with, when you came up with this idea of these others who were basically these incredibly long-lived, have a completely different view of the universe and the timeline that we do because we're so short-lived,
yeah.
and how you were going to have something that different still interact with people that your readers could relate to, that I thought was just seriously cool. Is that the fun part of you for writing, is figuring out the mechanisms or making it work? I mean, you do it and you still do it, so there must be something you enjoy about it. What's the best part for you about creating a story?
Well, it's all fun. I think you'd have to say that doing research is the most fun because there's no pain involved with it. There's you don't have to be judged for your research. And it's all, if you're a writer, you were probably a student for a long time first. And it's sort of something you're used to. And you sit down and make notes and diagrams and stuff like that and have a lot of fun. And then ultimately it has to wind up in a book and be part of a story, not just be a fun bunch of extrapolation.
So thinking up's the fun part, putting it down on a sheet of paper is a pain.
More or less honest work. Yeah. Yeah, but I wouldn't call it a pain anymore. You know, at this late date, if I didn't enjoy doing it, I could go out and get a job. But I found after a few books that, yes, parts of it are very difficult, but you can't write around them. You just got to go plowing through the hard parts. And the most fun part, of course, is finishing the book and mailing it off, and
right.
That's the way we get there.
I was also, I was looking you up online, catching up, seeing what you were doing, what deviltry you were up to, and I came across something called Joe's Place, which was kind of like, and I'm being presumptuous here, was kind of like sitting down with you at breakfast and saying, what have you been doing lately? And
yeah.
It really feels like a conversation with you when you go on that site and just see what you've decided to put down for the day.
That's exactly what I wanted. Joe's Place actually started, I don't know, back in the 80s,
mm-hmm.
when we had the Genie network of science fiction writers talking to each other over primitive computer networking.
Talk about a tribal bond.
Yeah.
That one.
And it was just an ongoing conversation. Basically, the General Electric computer network, Genie, found that they only used about 10% of their capability during the late night hours, and they donated it to the Science Fiction Writers of America to use as a sort of a bulletin board. And very primitive in terms of computers, but it was instantaneous communication and as you say, a real sense of community. So we had a lot of fun, and nowadays, well, it's pretty real time, and I can scan in pictures, and I can play music, whatever I want to do, you know.
You've always been a wonderful storyteller. I remember a story you told me about Hay on Wye and a certain parrot one time.
Oh, yeah.
But the story about you and Gay in Marrakesh, I was just trying, knowing you now and thinking of you as a young couple back then and what you got yourself into and how you got yourself out of it. And I'll make everybody go to Joe's place to find the story. But it showed me a slightly different side of you, but it's still Joe. And I thought that was just absolutely terrific. And I'm also seeing a lot of your artwork. You're doing more artwork now. How did that come about?
Well, actually, it came about because the technology appeared. I draw all the time, and sometimes it's relevant to what we're discussing.
Right.
And on sff.net, I can't do this, but on LiveJournal, I can scan in photos and pictures of my pictures and just put them in there. It doesn't cost any extra, and hey.
Why not?
Yeah.
Now, is this just something for relaxation? Is this something that you're trying to develop more facility with the artwork?
I always try to get better, but it's basically for fun. But so is the writing. You know, everything is just a big hobby for me, so that's okay.
Do you still teach?
Oh yeah, that's a hobby too.
Oh, I don't know if that's a hobby. I mean, how long have you been teaching at MIT now?
Since 1983.
So you have a little perspective. Have you seen in the last, say 10, 15 years, with the rise of electronic media, electronic communication, have you seen any changes in your students in terms of the way that they learn and as you interact with them in your classes?
Well, in terms of what they create, I have seen a big change. And actually this goes back to the mid-'70s when I taught at Iowa, the Iowa Writers Workshop. And, well, one big change, here's one that's organic to computers. It used to be when you taught writing fiction, and there were deadlines for students to deliver stories. What you would get would be a 10-page story, say you ask for a minimum of 10 pages. You would get 7 pages of pretty good stuff, and then 3 pages just absolutely jammed in at the end, and to get you to page 10. With computers, what you get is 10 pages of which the middle is full of stuff that was jammed in to make it get out to 10 pages. So it's a different kind of laziness or haste.
Is there any change in the things people are interested in, or the elements of what you teach that people take to or respond to?
Well, one thing that I suppose is so obvious, well, maybe not. One thing that's interesting is writing about the tool that you're using to write with. That is to say, an awful lot of stories are about trouble with computers. Really? And you know that somebody's sitting there at a keyboard. If he was sitting there with a fountain pen, he wouldn't be writing about trouble with computers, right? And so it's just, well, what shall I write about? Well, what I've been worrying about for the past 2 days, it's about the computer, so that's what goes in there. I'm a fountain pen guy myself, although I go through a computer stage before I submit a story.
I remember an interview Neil Gaiman did once. He said that when he tried to write a story with a pen rather than with a word processor, he found it completely changed the way he approached writing the story and thinking the story through before he put something down. Do you think that applies to modern storytellers too?
I think it does, yeah. In fact, the difference between a manual typewriter and a computer is almost as profound as between a pen and a computer. And you wouldn't think so, it's a keyboard. but it's the physical part of it, and the noise, and the fact that you can't change it once you've put it down.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite different. There was an article, I guess in a writing magazine a couple of years ago. A guy had deliberately started using manual typewriters because of the constraints that it put on his creativity.
Really?
And I've got it. I know exactly what he means, because it's part of what I feel about using the fountain pen as opposed to a pencil. You put it down and it's pretty much there. You can cross it out and write something over it, but maybe you shouldn't have put it down then,
So it makes you approach how you think before you put it down on paper, and
I believe
is
so.
this word more careful appropriate?
I think you compose your sentences more carefully, or I do. I know that a lot of my students would benefit from using a pen, because with the keyboard they're so fluent and so facile. I get sentences that really have to be analyzed and carved down and made more clear, because they're just thinking aloud,
Mm-hmm.
which is fine when you're taking notes for a class or something like that. That's great. But when you're writing, if you're James Joyce, you can get away with it.
But there aren't that many people who are James.
No,
Joyce.
that's true.
No. One thing happened. Now, we're taping this during the Nebula convention here in Washington, D.C. This is in May of 2011. And we've just seen another shuttle launch. That's the last flight for that particular shuttle. And we're seeing the end of the U.S. commitment to continued manned exploration of space,
Yeah.
at least for the time being.
Well,
What
I
does that
would
say about us, do you think? That we're walking away from something that we kind of set the standard for?
Well, the easy thing to say is we've lost our nerve. That as a country, we don't want to be in the front of this kind of exploration anymore. But that ignores a lot of the actual reasons, the actual political realities behind it. To say we can't afford to go into space and to make that sort of spectacle is an oversimplification.
Mm-hmm.
We can't afford not to feed poor people, and we can't afford this and we can't afford that. Certainly money that would be spent into some space spectacular might be better spent in elementary education or something like that. But can you give me a single example of a time when a government program was canceled and the money for it was given to another government program? I don't think there has ever been that. I mean, because the government is not one individual with simple decision-making powers. So I get a little, somebody says, well, the space program is a waste of time and effort and so forth, and money certainly, and I go, that's like saying a baby isn't worth the effort, because you don't know what's coming out of that. The space program that we are quitting was, yes, about done. We'd done about all we could with the shuttle and the things the shuttle could do. But it's time to try something different. And the obvious one is to replace the shuttle with a reusable Earth to low Earth orbit.
And as useful and as capable as the shuttle was, it is technology that's almost a quarter century old.
Oh, more than a quarter century, I think, most of it. Yeah, it's very primitive, and well, that's not bad if primitive means it works and is proven and so forth. But in fact, the thing still is a bucket of bolts. I mean, it's a tremendously complicated machine.
It is kind of like one of those wheels and gears and constantly turning. You almost think of Chaplin in that movie where he goes through the gears on
Right.
as he's trying to repair it, kind of a person.
Yeah. Well, back in the 70s, I guess, NASA was talking about sending a writer up with one of the space shuttle things. And so I applied. And while I was filling out the application, I had this sudden feeling of, should you really do this? I mean, this is before anybody had died. But we knew what that thing was, and we knew it was only a matter of time before there was going to be a disaster that killed 7 people, at least. And I even wrote an article about it for Analog Magazine. warning people to be ready. Not saying to stop it, because you have to take chances.
You have train wrecks, you have car wrecks, you have plane wrecks. I mean, if you have enough people doing something often enough, something bad's going to happen to someone.
Well, but the space shuttle is more dangerous than a hot dragster. You know, it's really quite a chancy way to get from one place to another.
I remember one gentleman commenting that the reason that America was riveted on the early space program, especially when we started launching astronauts into space, was because up until that time, the Russians were doing it, and we didn't hear about their failures. But we knew that a lot of the time, our rockets blew up.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like going to a NASCAR race to see whether or not there's going to be a spectacular car wreck on this one.
If you had a car in NASCAR that had multiply redundant systems and you know, everything just absolutely polished down to the last molecule, because of course the shuttle could have gone up for a third what it cost if we didn't mind it crashing.
If we didn't care.
Yeah. In fact, it is a difference, I suppose, obviously, between the American psychology and Russian psychology, and American government and Russian government, because a lot of those Russian spacecrafts that crashed into the desert, nobody found out about until
this is true.
Later.
Before we leave, we're almost out of time. I wanted to ask one. You know, since you are working on a new novel, and it's called
the one I'm working on now is called Work Done for Hire,
and the basis of it is the concept.
Well, the concept work done for hire is a writing term for when you write something that's like an adventure novel that will have somebody else's name on it.
Right.
And you have no interest in the copyright. You're just getting paid to do a job.
Right.
And this has various levels of meaning in the actual novel, which is a guy who's just come back from the desert as a soldier, and he's got an English degree, and he's trying to make a living writing adventure novels. And he's writing one about a monster, which is, the novel is embedded in the text of my novel. And he doesn't yet quite know that writing about the monster, he's writing about himself. But he's going to find out pretty soon.
Ooh, that sounds like a fun one.
Yeah, because he was a soldier, and he killed a lot of people in a day's work. And while he was a soldier, it didn't bother him much, but he's not a soldier anymore.
Which has a lot of resonance both with past wars and current conflicts for the guys coming home, and gals.
Yeah, I don't think that we prepare people well enough for that.
No, we don't.
Well, of course, in training, they don't say, well, now you're going to go out and kill people, and we want to make you comfortable with that.
Joe, as always, it's not enough time, and just not enough time to talk about you, talk about the things that you're interested in, and to just sit with you. Thank you so much for coming by, but always a pleasure. Hope to see you again soon.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Tom.
Thank you, Joe. Well, that's it for this edition of Fast Forward. We hope you found something of interest. We hope you come see us again. Until then, this is Tom Schott saying, take care.